subject. Do you know, a few years ago, I kind of, you could say, I received a kind of understanding that one of the most important things for me to bring forth in my role as a teacher, in this teaching, was to really bring forth some clarity into the whole realm of life beyond self and the experience of no self. That I realize that this is a very important part of my teaching work. It's probably the most challenging part of the teaching work, not only for those who participate in it, those who are listening, those who are studying it, I guess you'd say, but also for myself as well. It's definitely the most challenging part of the spiritual journey to verbalize, to give voice to. Do you know, I guess you could say in the spiritual marketplace today, the idea, the notion of no self is bandied about, and I think it's often talked about in a way that doesn't do it justice, actually. That's kind of casual, hip, you might say, in the sense of being modern. But often I feel like it really misses the mark. A lot of the talk and the discussion around no self is actually much more about the idea of no self, the philosophy of it, the theology of no self. And I'm not interested in any of that. None of that. I'm not interested in exploring this subject in a casual way, or a theological way, or a philosophical way. I'm only interested in exploring this in an experiential way. And this is very important to recognize. Because as I said, most of what we hear about it is really a kind of a philosophy of no self. And often it's not a very well-developed philosophy. A sort of modernized theology of no self. And often this comes out of perhaps glimpses of a moment beyond self, maybe more. But there's a great difference between a moment of self-transcendence and the actual lived experience of no self. And so I want to bring some clarity to some of these issues to start this course off with. And as I said, it's challenging for me to give voice to these, to talk about these. It's very hard to find the language. It's challenging to find the correct language. And it's also, I think we'll be going into realms that are quite subtle and quite profound, and yet require a real focus, a real focus. And probably this evening, to be quite honest, this evening may be the most difficult of them all, the most difficult of all, because I really want to start by really jumping into the deep end of this whole subject. As I said, I don't want to talk about this in a casual way or a philosophical way. Often it's talked about in one of those two ways. You know, we have a lot of talk about no self in sort of Vedic circles of teaching, but what I hear or what I read about is much more philosophical and very far removed, I think, from the actual experience. It doesn't do justice, a lot of what's out there, to the real lived experience of it. There's nothing casual about the lived experience of it. There's nothing actually philosophical about it. It's very concrete. It's very obvious. It's very profound. And so I want to look at it this way. And even when it's talked about in a sophisticated way, often it becomes philosophical. You know, in the religion that I did most of my spiritual training in Zen Buddhism, you know, in Buddhism there is some talk about no self, but it's often talking about, again, even though this philosophy arises out of the Buddha's direct experience of no self, and others also experience of no self. But often the teachings come off as very, very philosophical, even in a simple sense of one of the central teachings of no self in Buddhism is that all things, whether it's you, whether it's a rock, a chair, a tree, a car, that nothing has a sort of self-essence. That, in other words, if you break things down into its constituent parts, that everything is sort of an assemblage of different parts. And if you pull all the parts together, you don't find some substantial kind of entity in the center of them. In other